If you thought Democrats were done announcing presidential candidacies, you would be wrong. New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio threw his hat into the ring today. De Blasio has been involved in New York City government since the mid-'80s, but he's not exactly New Yorkers' first choice for president. A Quinnipiac poll last month found 76% of New York City voters think he should not run. De Blasio addressed that number this morning in an interview with ABC.
So what should the rest of the country think when so many of your fellow New Yorkers are saying don't run?
You know, I got elected mayor by 73% of the vote originally, re-elected with 67% of the vote. I think you'd agree that the poll that actually matters is the election. So New Yorkers have twice said that they wanted me to lead them. And I think about polling in general, it's not where you start, it's where you end. So in the course of this campaign, we're going to talk about what working people need and how their government should be on their side. Right now, the federal government is not on the side of working people. And that's because Donald Trump is playing a big con on America. I call him Con Don. Every New Yorker knows he's a con artist. We know his tricks. We know his playbook. I know how to take him on. I've been watching him for decades. He's trying to convince working Americans he's on their side. It's been a lie from day one. So I believe I'll be able to show the kinds of things we have done here are what's needed all over this country so working people can live better.
Regardless of what his constituents think, de Blasio is running, and he is now among 24 Democrats vying for the nomination. The Democratic National Committee has said that only 20 candidates will make the stage at the first set of debates in Miami next month, meaning somebody is going to be left out. Joining me now is WNYC radio host Brian Lehrer. He interviews Mayor de Blasio every week for his program, The Brian Lehrer Show. And alongside Brian is CBSN political reporter Caitlin Huey-Burns. I'm not sure what it says to me that I'm so excited to talk to you, Brian, about Mayor de Blasio, but let's move on. So what does the rest of the country, beyond New York City, need to know about Bill de Blasio?
Well, they need to know that he leads with his values. He's very quick to call himself a progressive, but then he has to do a job managing a very complicated city. And sometimes he gets it from the right in New York, and sometimes he gets it from the left. That's where I would start.
Well, why don't New Yorkers want him to actually run?
Well, I think you have to look below the top line of that poll. I know everybody's talking about this Quinnipiac poll from last month where people said that, and also that his approval rating is low at 43%. But if you look one layer deeper, you'll see that his approval rating among white New Yorkers is only 31%, but his approval rating among black New Yorkers is 66%. Mayor de Blasio is very popular in the black community. He is married to a black woman. He has black kids. I think it was no accident that he gave his wife a speaking role and a very public role on their rollout on Good Morning America this morning. And a journalist with the New York Times told me recently that in her experience, talking to black voters, there is nobody better in her experience other than Barack Obama.
Interesting. So I want to just delve a little bit deeper into that, because that's not something I'm sure we hear about at the national level. Help us understand, why is that so significant, Brian?
Well, it's significant for one thing because African Americans are a very significant voting bloc in Democratic primaries. Obviously, they're a significant voting bloc in New York City. And I think that this is part of what de Blasio considers the lane, if you will, to victory. There are 14 white males in this race. What distinguishes him is that he's got a real track record with African Americans. Now, the same can be said about Joe Biden. So I'm not saying he's unique, but if anybody's going to compete with Biden and Cory Booker and Kamala Harris, it may or may not work out this way, but I think this is in Bill de Blasio's head one of the reasons he thinks he could do it.
So because he is conversant when it comes to issues of race is the perception that presumably he would argue he brings as a candidate.
Conversant, and very familiar at the level of family and at the level of deep professional political experience.
So there is a clip that I want to play for both of you from de Blasio's announcement video released today. Let's listen to that.
Donald Trump must be stopped. I've beaten him before, and I will do it again.
So, you know, Caitlin, de Blasio took a page out of the Donald Trump playbook and gave him a nickname, that Con Don nickname. What do you make of deploying that strategy that we know the president was able to deploy very effectively? Here he is trying to turn the tables.
Well, de Blasio certainly got the attention of the president today. He was tweeting about him and tweeting about those poll numbers, saying that he's unpopular in New York City. Of course, Donald Trump himself isn't that popular here, but he was trying to say that he's not in charge of New York, and de Blasio is. But when it comes to these nicknames, this was certainly a signal that he wants to take Donald Trump head on, kind of using their shared experience in New York as a way to kind of go toe-to-toe or mano a mano with him. But what's really interesting is that Republicans tried to do this with Trump last time around in the primary and weren't successful, calling him a con man. We heard that from people like Marco Rubio and Jeb Bush. And of course, Hillary Clinton in the general election tried to make this clear to voters. And we know how that turned out. So this is going to be a challenge for all of these Democrats, is not only competing with each other, but competing against Donald Trump. And how they do that is going to be interesting to watch. I
think, though, that in a Trump re-election campaign, the name calling is going to take on a different cast, and in particular in this case. I think it's actually very strategic that de Blasio chose Con Don, because I think he's going to make a substantive case around that the president sold himself to working Americans, working class Americans, as on their side when the establishment wasn't. But de Blasio is going to argue that that was a con, that ultimately he's like any other Republican, Donald Trump is, when it comes to toting up to the rich and not really doing anything for working class Americans. I have a feeling there's going to be substance behind Con Don. We won't know if it works, but in advance, but that's, I think, where he's going.
I mean, he has to get through the Democratic primary first.
Obviously, but he's setting himself up because people want electability more than anything else. We've seen that over and over again in the polls. They want somebody who can beat Donald Trump. And so if that helps sell Democratic primary voters on him being the one who could beat Donald Trump, then I think that's what he's at least trying to do.
So, Brian, you're going to be interviewing Mayor de Blasio tomorrow on your program. What are you going to ask him?
10 o'clock on 93.9
Plug
FM
away,
in New
sir.
York.
Plug away. What time is that?
WNYC.org around the country.
Okay.
Well, one of the things that we're going to do, because our segment is Ask the Mayor, is tell him that we're going to keep him accountable on local issues. Even though we're going to ask him a little bit each week, probably about his presidential run, people need to know that he's still paying attention to New York City. So we're going to do that. But I will ask him, per what we were talking about before, why would you be a better president for African Americans than Kamala Harris, for example? And we'll go from there.
All right, a little preview there for all you Brian Lehrer fans. So Bill de Blasio, we were talking about this concept of working class Americans, but Bill de Blasio talks about quote unquote working Americans while Joe Biden talks about the working class. Is there a distinction here? I mean, Caitlin, when we hear that, difference of terminology there, what should we be understanding from that?
Well, I think both are speaking to what we're seeing in this Democratic primary, the focus on the American worker, and this idea that while the economy looks good on paper, it doesn't always look good for everyone. And you hear a lot of them trying to make this argument about fairness and equality or inequality. So that's, I think, what we're seeing here. I think, to Brian's point, de Blasio is trying to say, look, in the trenches. I'm there with these people. Now, he will get criticism for that, or scrutiny, I should say, for how his record matches up with that. But this idea of gearing campaigns towards the working people is something that we're hearing a lot. I mean, Bernie Sanders, of course, this was really key to his campaign the first go round and again this time around.
What do you think?
I would add to that this too is racially coded the way I read it. That when they say working class, and Trump says working class, Joe Biden says working class, it tends to read white working class. When de Blasio says working people first, which is his slogan, when he leaves out the word class, I think that's a signifier to people of color that he's talking about you too.
Interesting. All right. Well, on the topic of Joe Biden, so the former vice president is putting his presidential campaign headquarters in Philadelphia. We know he is from Scranton, Pennsylvania, about 120 miles north. But Caitlin, what is the significance of putting his headquarters in Philadelphia?
Well, Philadelphia is where Democrats held their national convention in 2016, and it's a little easier to get to for him and his campaign staff, for one thing. But significantly, Democrats want to really rev up their vote in the Philadelphia suburbs. suburbs. And Democrats feel like that's kind of where they were losing out. And we did see in 2018, actually, Democrats were able to flip 3 congressional seats in Pennsylvania around the Philadelphia suburbs and around the suburbs of Pittsburgh. So this is a way for him to kind of identify with, even though he was a senator from Delaware, it's also very close by to Philadelphia. This is a way for him to kind of establish his footing. And we know that Pennsylvania is going to be a key state in this general election. And Biden right now is, at least at this point in time, trying to wage a general election campaign.
Very easy to get to on that Amtrak
Yes,
that he loves so much. Well, Caitlin, you spoke to former Pennsylvania Governor Ed Rendell for a piece that you have out today. It's headlined, "God, Guns, and Gays, Once Third Rail, Now Center Stage in Campaign 2020. So tell us about that.
Well, we've seen this really interesting movement within the Democratic primary where they're embracing issues related to gun legislation, to gay rights, and actually talking about religion and their personal faith on the campaign trail a lot. And we have seen the shift within the party over the past several years. But what's different this time around is how much they're embracing these issues proactively and not on the defense, and also feeling that they can gain some steam in the general election, not just revving up their bases in the primary. And especially as the president, the incumbent president, Donald Trump, wages issues on cultural and social issues, they feel like they can also compete here. I was talking to the former governor about Pennsylvania and about these issues, and he had remarked how quickly public opinion had changed significantly on gay rights and on gun issues, particularly on background checks. And that's not where the party needs to be concerned. It's fine for them to do that. They also need to talk about economic issues and make that the priority. So he said that's the balance they're going to need to strike, and something he'll be watching for.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how, in fact, those strategies progress here in the months ahead. All right, Caitlin Huey-Burns and Brian Lehrer, thank you both for stopping by. Appreciate it.